Hey everybody, David Chatham here with Angel Oak Creative. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Nonprofit State of Mind from Angel Oak Creative. This is where we kind of pick the brains of nonprofit leaders and just try to leave a little better than when we started. So grateful for all the guests that we've had. We've had some interesting conversations over the last couple of years. Everything ranging from nonprofit innovation to nonprofit fails. So everything in between. And today we've got a great conversation about succession planning. Before you press pause on that podcast, trust me, this is going to be a good conversation. So hope you'll hang in there for it. We have two great guests today. We have Bobby Simpson. Bobby's retired from Duke Energy and had his own experiences there with some succession planning, and then is also a board member of Transitions Life Care here in the Triangle. Thank you, Bobby. How are you?
I'm doing well today. Thanks, David.
Well, we appreciate you being here. And then we also have Chileatha Wynn, who's the Director of Clinical Education at North Carolina A&T University and is also on the board of Transitions Life Care. Welcome, Chileatha.
Hey, David, good to be with you.
Thank you both so much for being here. I wanted to start with just letting you tell a little bit about, just your background, how you came to be involved in the nonprofit sector, and then what what got you involved in the glamorous world of succession planning.
Bobby, you want to tee it off or you want me to go?
Sure, I'll start it off. So,
Okay.
well, I worked for over 40 years at Duke Energy, and so when I started with that company, I experienced some things that helped me learn that succession planning is critical because we didn't have one, and there were some unfortunate and painful experiences that I endured. And then as the
Yeah.
company uh, learned the importance of that and put that in place, I was a beneficiary of it. And that happens to be a skill set I developed by virtue of having to use it that actually found its way over into a nonprofit that needed a
Mhm.
succession plan. So I was able to transfer that experience and share it with a nonprofit.
Uh, Shalitha, how about you?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in healthcare now for about 20 years in leadership, ownership of a practice in different capacities, in the transition to education and really just wanting to find other ways to use my skills and get engaged in community work has really been what's led to my work at Transitions. And so kind of the same as Bobby, being in situations where you see succession that doesn't exist. And what happens to companies and institutions when there really isn't a plan in place has been the thing that's really made me passionate about this. But then more recently, being involved in governance committees, like, at Transitions, and involved in kind of normalizing the conversation of succession, has really even sparked more interest, I think, in this work and has been very helpful.
Thank you both for that information, for that introduction. I mean, it some people I think feel like succession planning is kind of sitting around and waiting for someone to pass away, right? That's the idea of it. But really, talk about um, why is it so important for nonprofits of just about any size to consider what's next in their leadership with succession planning? Chalitha, you wanna start on this?
Sure, sure, absolutely. So I think, if you have a conversation with someone in leadership and you ask, how long they expect folks to stay on board, no one would ever say until they retire or pass away, right? I think we all realize that people grow in their movements and in different situations, but for whatever reason, we just don't normalize the conversation about succession. It's looked at like more of a threat. So it's important to prioritize, especially in the nonprofit space, because if you don't have a succession plan, you can lose so much context for the
Mm,
business. Um, and I've said it before and I'll say again that if it's important enough to build and create, it's important enough to preserve.
Yeah.
And a lack of planning for succession really just will guarantee that you'll have a loss of the business's memory. And sometimes, unfortunately, that leads to failure.
Yeah. Um, Bobby, we got to dig deep into succession planning, working on the Harvard 100 succession planning learning module, which was a labor of love, I think, for both of us, and we enjoyed that working with the good friend and philanthropist Chuck Recor. And through that process, we talked a little bit about why do nonprofits, why do leaders um, avoid this topic, or why do they try to ignore the need for a succession plan? What's your experience there?
Well, Chuck's the one that, I think Chuck once said, I don't know if this is true or not, but he said it's a statistic that 30% of executive directors in our community won't be here in 5 years.
Mm.
Wow.
And so I think the thing that keeps people from wanting to do it is I use the phrase I heard one time: people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the what of succession planning, which frankly, when you start looking at it, it looks really hard and complex and detailed and time consuming. And it just
Don't oversell it, Bobby.
it just but people, I know people, it interferes with the cadence of what they like to do every day.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to sell people on why you do it.
Yeah.
And it's the why that matters, and having a why that helps people understand. Without one, you're going to suffer some painful hardships.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to commit to the what, and you can do the succession planning and make it fun if you really work at it.
Yeah.
Well, what was Chuck's comment about it? It's either like a path for success or a death spiral or something.
That's right, the death spiral.
Yeah, he
You
called
know
it
what,
a death spiral. Yeah.
I think too, there's a human part of this, right? Like, we all want to feel really important and really needed in our roles. And when
Right.
we start thinking about succession, it's like, I could be replaced, or, maybe I'm investing in somebody who's going to have my seat or my hat at some point.
Yeah.
So I think there's a really human part of this and our feelings, and the thing um, that really should be the focus is, what is there to lose, right?
Yeah.
Not that someone's going to take your place, but this is to make sure that the work that you've done is preserved. And so I think that may be part of it too, the apprehension around really having a plan for what's next is sometimes we don't want to think about there being a next.
Yeah. Our own mortality can be a little scary, right?
That's right. Yeah.
In that way. Yeah, and I think, some other, kind of objections I've heard is I think Bobby, you kind of alluded to this, is just the amount of time and energy it
Mm-hmm.
takes to do it, right? That it's, that we need to, we're too busy doing what we're doing. We need to we need to focus on our
Yeah.
mission. We can't, we don't want to get distracted. How do you overcome that objection? I mean, it's a
Well,
legitimate, problem, right?
yeah, it's a valid concern, but here's what I've learned kind of the hard way is you can tailor it for what fits your organization. So,
Mm-hmm.
I've had experience working with a large organization where you do kind of need to have a complex succession plan and involve a lot of people and committees and time and so forth. But I've also worked with some small nonprofits that just don't have the resources
Yeah.
deal with it. But there is a way to skinny it down and make it
Mm-hmm.
simple and leverage some outside resources to just come in and do the hard stuff. There's a way to really simple it down. So it's not by definition big, hard, and complex.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we tried to do that with the Harvard 100 learning module, right? Was to really try to hone in on that information that, is kind of universal and helpful and moving things forward without overwhelming people with too much information or making it too complex. And And, I think we generally succeeded in terms of that. I think the feedback we've gotten has been positive. So, Chileatha, anything else to add to any of that?
I think multi-purposing time and opportunities as well. The annual review, which,
Mm,
most places will have, that can be a great time to start learning about people's desire to move forward, or other skill sets that you may not even know they have. So just multi-purposing opportunities to speak with people and really find out if there are other ways that they could contribute, and
yeah,
you could have your next leader there,
yeah.
and not even realize it.
So,
So David, another thought.
please, yeah.
I think, I went back and looked at a couple of the videos when we did the tool,
Mm-hmm.
and it was Chuck Recor that said anyone who uses this tool should be able to develop a unique functional succession plan.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And to your point, that is how we designed it.
yeah,
You have the ability to pick, it's like tools in a toolbox. You can pick what
Mhm.
yeah,
you need and tailor it to your organization.
yeah. I think as much as we love them, and you all are board members can sometimes be a challenge, right? I know you two are two exceptions. I'm sure you've never caused any problems on the boards you've served on. I'm sure you're perfect model board members, but
Absolutely.
that said, what's the case to the board, right? The leadership is one thing, but the board is a little different animal, right? So what's the case to the board for this succession to go down the road of succession planning? And either one of you that wants to take the first run at it, feel free.
I think one of the first ways to get buy-in from the board, and not that Bobby or I are like this, but I think the board just wants to be heard, right? So I would say the first way to start the conversation is to ask them what they think.
Mm,
And that will typically start some conversation, um, and get you some buy-in, because you can, kind of go from there, leverage some of their ideas and some of their networks, and that tends, I would say, to be helpful.
so you shouldn't lug in the 50-page succession planning workbook and say, "Hey guys, we're gonna go through this succession planning whether you
Tomorrow.
like it or not." That's probably good advice, Julie. Bobby, how about you? Any thoughts on how to get the board on board with succession planning?
Yeah, well, the first thing I think of is if you're talking to donors, especially donors that are highly committed and contribute a lot, uh, this having a succession plan is really a case for why would you want to invest in us?
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's true.
You know, why would you want to invest in an organization that doesn't have a succession plan? Because if somebody leaves abruptly, Shalitha mentioned it a minute ago, you lose the ability to preserve all that you've built. So
Mhm.
you could be having a capital campaign or
Yeah.
major programs that you're working on, and so it creates donor anxiety.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And so the
yeah,
ability to say, look, we have this, and I think it makes a huge difference.
yeah,
Bobby, that's it. The work that we do together, that really makes me think toward mission. And for a board, especially one that's volunteer, to really be engaged, this is something that everyone agrees with, right? We're all bought into the mission, and we have our own personal reasons for wanting to be involved in this space, and our own, reasons for being passionate about something. Um, and I think that's the way to connect and leverage the board, right? We have to have a succession plan to keep this kind of dream alive, and the mission moving forward. Um, and besides asking what they think, because board members tend to like to talk about what they think, but where we all kind of align with the mission and why this is important, I think that's always a good place to kind of bring everybody back and remind everyone, this is the work that has to be done. And in
Yeah.
order to keep it going, this is something that we need to invest in. So I'd say that would be a wonderful way to engage the board and really get them buying into something, succession planning, anything really,
Yeah.
is to remind them about the mission of the work and why they're committed to it.
Yeah, that idea of sustainability, right?
Right.
Of longevity. And I
Yeah.
think that I think you mentioned it, Chileatha, the preservation, right, of
Yeah.
that organization and the impact that it's making. I mean, I've seen
Right.
we work with hundreds of nonprofits, and I've
Yeah.
seen handful or more that did not plan for the next leadership, and
Right.
they may not have folded as an organization, but their impact was greatly,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And they were inefficient. Um, they were not directed. They were not led, and
Yeah.
sadly the mission suffered. And it's recoverable, right?
Hmm.
But it's not necessary if you
Right.
are able to take that succession planning, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
it's recoverable, but it takes a lot of time and
Energy.
effort.
So much energy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
that
that
could be
Yeah.
put towards the mission, to your point, Chile.
Exactly. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So a little bit of it's an ounce of prevention is worth a
Pound
pound
to
of
cure.
cure.
There you
That's
go.
right.
The old
That's
adage,
right.
right?
And
Um,
and
so
David, it made me think of something else. So just
okay,
it's a story I like to tell of being in a board meeting and getting on my soapbox about the importance of succession planning and trying to get traction with it. And it taking a long time to get that traction.
Hmm.
And I noticed a board member I think it was his second meeting, a brand new board member, and he was looking at me with a funny look. And finally I said, Don, do you have a question? And he said, Bobby, I understand what you're talking about. I got this. Well, it turns out he was the VP of HR at Martin Marietta.
wow,
So, so
that was
that's
jackpot right
yeah,
there.
that
Yeah.
was the catalyst that made it happen. So
That's like
I think
winning the lottery.
yeah,
Hmm.
and I think it's important to understand the talents and skills of your board and leverage them.
That's a good
Absolutely.
point.
Yeah.
That's a good
Absolutely.
point.
So
So,
true.
we've got the leadership on board, we got the board on board. We're going to start doing the work. What are some common mistakes that organizations might make as they move into that process when they're building out that succession plan? And, you know, how can they avoid them, if at least to be aware of them anyway?
I think one of the mistakes is the weight. Um, and it really not becoming a intentional conversation or action until it's too late, right? We start
Mhm.
seeing things that dominoes are falling and you're trying to damage control and it's hard to come up with a really good plan as the runway is shortening on you. So I think that, failure to invest early and to really start having these conversations early. Um, and that's the other thing too that can be unfortunate where we make mistakes, I think, with succession is um not leveraging the contacts that we have in front of us, not leveraging
Yeah.
the skill sets that we have in front of us. And often if the conversation were had earlier, and some intentional professional development were being done, we have right here with us everything that we need to be successful, even as leadership moves on to replace what we need. But because the conversation isn't had, you don't realize that someone else is ready or equipped to step
Mhm.
up, until sometimes it's too late.
Yeah.
And I
Moss, what
think
about you?
it's to me, I think of having alignment with the board and the
Mm.
staff and helping making sure people understand the process and the timeline and then
Mhm.
having progress reports.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is there, is there a best practice, or is it, is it is it something that's a DIY, right? Does the board do it themselves? Do you bring in consultants? And maybe there's not a pat answer there, but
Yeah.
what's your advice for nonprofits? How can they maybe discern if it's something they can do internally or if it's something they might need a little outside help with?
Well, I experienced that because of the Harvard 100. I worked with 5 nonprofits that were developing succession plans for a grant award.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my learning process was interacting with the small to medium to large.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I had to answer questions I wasn't initially prepared to answer because I didn't expect to be asked them. But the smaller ones typically hired a consultant and used some of the grant money to pay for that consultant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they didn't realize that was the right way to go until they got into it. So I think you just
Mm-hmm.
got to roll up your sleeves and start doing
Yeah.
hard stuff, and then figure out where you offload it.
Okay.
Sure.
What about you, Chileatha? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. So, on some of the teams that I've worked with, bringing in outside help would tend to be, you have your groups of tasks, where there's kind of low yield and it doesn't cost much to do. You have the higher yield things that are going to be very impactful, but are also very difficult to do. Those are things you have to just get honest and get help for. I think, especially, if you already have a group that's really spread thin, and that there are areas where you really could use the expertise, higher impact things that are going to require a higher investment. I think if folks are really transparent and honest with themselves, it's good to
Yeah.
get outside help with some of those tasks.
I see, I'm not judging this, it's more of an observation, but I see a lot of job postings for executive director roles. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing sometimes that's kind of part of their bylaws, right? That they have to advertise for those, but maybe the hire is done within eventually, right? But it seems like some of that can be avoided with a succession
Mm-hmm.
plan, but maybe I'm misunderstanding that idea. Is that, I mean, if there's a succession plan, would there normally be a search for an ED like that? Or maybe I misunderstand kind of what that means. Or is that part of
Um,
a succession plan that you do a search and you don't necessarily have to promote from within?
I think so. If you have a succession plan and you have people identified that are ready now, so to speak, to
Mm-hmm.
step into the role, it doesn't necessarily mean you wouldn't do an external search. It
Okay.
means that you have an option.
Okay.
And so the intent of some of the people might be to put that person in the role because they're ready now and you've developed them and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to do your due diligence to make sure that
That makes sense.
there is some competition there, and you
Mm-hmm.
might need to do an external search for various reasons that the organization is experiencing.
No,
And
that's
sometimes
helpful.
it's for a shakeup, right? Like,
Yeah,
sometimes
Yeah.
if there are things that are happening and you need a cultural shift, for things to happen that haven't been happening, sometimes it's good to bring in some, a fresh set of eyes, some new blood to
Yeah.
recharge things.
Yeah.
Whether you have folks inside that would qualify or not, if you really want to not have the same old, sometimes that's what you have to do,
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
outside.
Stir the pot a little bit, right?
Right.
So what what if there is an opportunity to move to use some internal resources, some internal human capital there,
Hmm.
what do folks need to do to identify that, to start to cultivate those people? How does that process get started? And I mean, do you tell somebody they're in line for leadership? Do you, how does it, what does that look like? Because I would think that would be a little challenging because you don't want to promise anybody something, right? But you also want
Mhm.
to give people opportunity. So what's that dance like there? But when you're talking to your internal team.
I had to do a lot of that in my career, and we use the term developmental planning.
Mhm.
Okay.
There's other names for it, but what that means, it's a process by which every person in your organization, and it's just a matter of how deep you go into the organization, but especially your key leaders, you want those people you want to have conversations with them where you understand what their strengths are, their developmental opportunities are, and
Mhm.
what their career aspirations are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because that can really light up a person and motivate them, because people want to progress and they want to know you care about
Right.
what they do with their careers. And so if you build a developmental plan, what that simply means is you focus on the things, how you leverage their strengths and how you
Mhm.
work on their improvement opportunities. And through that, you learn what jobs they're interested in. And so you can literally build a bench strength chart
Mhm.
that shows who's ready right now, who's ready short term or long term with some development for a given role. So people
Yeah.
they can see, well, there's a pipeline here to where I can advance and progress. And that way you get that two-way conversation going and you get the transparency to where people understand what you're doing. I think that's
Yeah.
a question.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I
Chile.
love that, Bobby. Yeah, no, I love that. And some of my favorite places where I've worked were the ones that had ongoing professional development, whether it was, HR offering courses internally that some, may be required, some could be optional around communication and leadership and change, different things. Those have been my favorite places to work. And so I think that that's important, whether you provide it yourself or you hire a third party, right, to do a series or offer something like that for your employees and your staff. You really can just optimize what you have. And it's the same way we look at patient populations or our customers. We want to optimize who we've got in our hands already, right? Before we try to grow and get new customers. You want to keep your current customers. And so the same for succession planning. Before you do a mega search, have someone come in from outside and have to train them up from nothing, it's always best to invest in who you have right there with you. The folks that have some sort of context, the relationships that have already been built, and just continuing to keep people motivated and excited about what they're doing. And I think professional development really helps. It really does.
Well, thank you. My dog's barking a little bit, so I hope that's. I warned you that might happen.
Wanted to be a part of the
Yeah,
conversation.
I know. So he's. I might have to create a succession plan for him if he keeps this up. Um, well, that's all really helpful. Thank you for that. How do you, with that talent, what are there particular skills that are really critical in terms of understanding what that professional development, what are those skills that seem to be, kind of universal towards being prepared for the next stage? Are there those, or is it really kind of individual?
I think communication for sure when it comes to leadership, promotion, any sort of advancement in anything, you have to be an effective communicator. And then also, being open to feedback, I think is a really important skill. Whether you want to move forward or you're leading people, you don't want to be in an echo chamber. You have to be open to feedback to continue to grow and to be able to move forward.
And
That's
I think
why
it
I'm
depends.
still where I'm at, Chileatha. I've never been able
Oh,
to
you're in
take
a good place.
I've
You're in
never
a
been
good
able to
place.
take feedback. It's
Yeah, you're in a
hard,
great
man.
place.
It's hard to hear the truth. Keep it real. So
Well, David, I think it also depends on the role.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think for each key leader role, for example, you have to know what are the critical skills needed to be effective in that role. And it varies different, communications is one that's probably applies across the board, but some roles, strategic thinking, for example, is like imperative. In other roles, it's you don't have to be strong in it.
Right. So as we kind of start to wrap up a little bit here, how do we ensure when we do need to make those transitions, what can we do to make sure that they're as smooth as possible with donors, with other stakeholders, partners, so people don't get, Bobby, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, kind of the idea of just being able to trust the organization to be able to want to continue to invest in it. How can you maintain that confidence, that trust in the organization through a leadership change? What does that look like, or what could it look like?
I think transparency is key.
Mm,
You know,
yeah,
you don't want to show your cards too early, but really controlling the narrative and limiting the amount of speculation is
yeah,
really helpful, because once the rumors start and people's minds just start going, it really gets difficult to contain it and keep the direction and focus where it should be. So I
yeah,
think being as transparent as possible, but then having a plan in place that you really stick to. And when things look like they're happening differently, that you're honest about that and there's an
yeah,
explanation for why. And you don't want to cause hysteria, but at the same time, I think that people have a reasonable expectation to be informed about what's happening. So I think that's important as things take place, right? We can't control what we can't control, but we can be transparent about things,
yeah.
and communicate in a way where folks feel, like they're being kept in the loop. And as things change, we don't leave it for people to find out or to hear it from someone else. We, really stay in front of it.
Yeah, well, my experience has been in the absence of information, people fill in that
Right.
themselves, right?
Exactly.
They
Yep.
Yeah.
it's the rumor mill, it's the
Yeah.
gossip, so if you don't provide that information, you open yourself up
Right.
that void that people will
Right.
fill on their own.
Yeah.
So, Bobby, any thoughts on that?
I agree with what Chileatha said. You have to have a communications plan, and
Hmm.
to me, I think you can have the framework for one of those that you just pull it off the shelf and start working on it
Hmm.
as ahead of something happening, and you have to
Yeah,
stay ahead of
yeah,
that. And knowing what and getting the key messages out there, and the key messages for donors might be different than the key messages for direct report employees.
Right.
So having that
right.
ready to go and staying ahead of it is critical.
Well, thank you both for your time. And I do want to ask, is there
Absolutely.
anything else? What one thing would you tell nonprofit leaders about succession planning? What's one critical takeaway that they should have here? Would love to hear from both of you.
But I always say, if it is important enough to build, it's important enough to preserve.
Very good. Yeah. And I would just say take advantage of your resources. The Triangle area has nonprofits that have already developed succession
Yeah.
plans. And so you have models and templates. Take it and make it happen.
Make it happen.
Love
Love
it.
it, Bobby. Thank you both, Chalitha, Bobby. Um,
Absolutely.
I do want to point people back again to that Harvard 100 resource. It's theharvard100.org. There's a big button basically that says succession planning module. So would encourage people to check that out. And how much does that cost, Bobby?
Not a dime.
Thanks to the generosity of Chuck Recor and Harvard 100, it's a free resource for nonprofits, and it features folks like Chalitha and Bobby and others uh, providing some great commentary as well as resources that can help any size nonprofit move into a successful succession planning exercise. So would encourage that. Thank you everybody for listening. Would love to have you listen to other episodes of a Nonprofit State of Minds. You can listen where you are now, Spotify, Apple, all of those places. And we're wrapping up our second season. So if God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll have a third season next year. So thank you both for being here, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.